It's your democracy. Own it.
So I'm a firm believer of the notion of you can't complain if you haven't voted. And I think in 2024, that notion has never rung truer.
I think it's very important for all registered voters to vote because it will allow us to vocalize our opinion and basically be a contributor of the beneficial future of our country.
It's important for us to go out there and cast our votes. We know what's happening in our country. We know we want change, and how else will change come to the country if we don't go out there and cast our vote?
And then the more young people vote, it will mean like more issues that affect the younger parts of our society will be addressed.
But the most important thing is for you to go out there and make your voice count.
Welcome to the IEC Podcast. It's Kiang Lube, and we are here educating South Africans about what the IEC does for South Africa. It's been 30 years since we've had our first democratic elections, as we did celebrate Freedom Day on Saturday, the 27th of April. And on the 29th of May, we'll be holding our 7th general elections. Yes, this 29th of May, 2024 is when it's happening. It is a Wednesday, so make sure that you're not working for starters, but make sure that you are registered in the correct district to cast your vote nationally and of course provincially as well. So today our first episode is all about 30 years of democracy in South Africa, and here to talk us through about it is the IEC chairperson Ntate Mosotho Moepya. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Gia. It's good to be with you.
Thank you so much for taking the time to speak to us about 30 years of democracy, what the IEC does for South Africa and with our elections. But before we get into it, we want to know more about your career. When you joined the IEC and why you've stayed with the IEC.
It's very interesting. In 1998, when I joined the IEC, in those days, the contracts we signed, the staff members of the Electoral Commission, were contracts for 2 or 3 years.
Okay.
Although the Electoral Commission was established as an institution that would be operating permanently, there were thoughts that perhaps the proper structuring of the commission would be established once people inside the commission have had an idea of the work they needed to do, and the right numbers of staff would then be determined. It was so in 2000. But when I joined the commission, I joined as a director in those years, in 1998, to establish the function that we now call electoral logistics, to design material for the commission that would be used in elections, and the infrastructure that would be used out there for registering and voting, the equipment that would be used, and so on and so forth. It's almost like, looking at how we are going to plan to reach persons on the ground on registration and election day, where you touch every square kilometer of the country, was a great start. But that's what we did those days. My contract came to an end, the 2 to 3 year thing. But there were other things that had happened in the meantime. I had the good fortune of being promoted, but also doing other areas, getting involved in other areas of the work that the commission does. And, I worked through many areas of the work we do, as senior manager, as deputy chief electoral officer, as chief electoral officer, and now as a commissioner.
What changes have you seen with your time with the IEC?
Lots of changes, I must say. I have seen, one thing I have seen, and that's the one thing I'll not forget, it's the determination of the people that came together from diverse backgrounds, understanding that elections are so critical for our nation, and yet they did not have that experience other than voting once, for that matter. Many of us, there were others that had voted, but many of us had not voted other than in 1994. So when we went back, the only thing like me that we knew was just marking the ballot. And now we had to go prepare for others to mark the ballot appropriately. And the determination of that group of people to make it work and to have a country that would be proud of what was organized for that election was an amazing thing. It continues to be a thing that the IEC does. A lot of people come and join us at the commission, and they are, you can tell by the kind of determination they have to succeed in the work that we do, and that's what makes this institution very different and very interesting to work for. We have seen many changes from an election we had in 1994 to an election that we will have in 2024. In 30 years, we have moved fundamentally to a level where you would not be wrong to say you're comparing chalk and cheese.
Oh, yeah.
And yet, the 1994 elections, in the context of 1994, were an amazing set of elections. Those elections, come to think about it, the commission, members of the commission, came together late in December, one afternoon. They met for the first time in that afternoon of December. And when they finished that meeting, they had to come out and publicly indicate that elections would be held on the 27th of April.
So just a couple of months.
4 months.
4 months, literally.
Almost 4 months.
Yeah.
They had no office. They had no staff. They were just themselves. They had no voters' roll. They had no, budget that said, you now have this. All of those things they had to go and put into plan and then organize an election. In that time, South Africa was a country that had many political difficulties.
Mm-hmm.
They had to deal with the climate in South Africa, fairly unstable in parts of the country. They had to deal with a nation that was expecting an election. The people wanted to just mark the ballot and know that they have now, had an opportunity to vote in an election in this country. And so there was no choice for them to say, we'll have an election in 2 years, we need to plan this, that, and the other. The most important thing was to see a government that was democratically elected and representative of the people of South Africa. So the pressure must have been telling, but it's a different kind of pressure that we would now be dealing with. And I'll come to that in a moment. So the election was then organized, as you know, on the 27th. But that election ran for a few days because precisely when you don't have a voters' roll, when you don't know who will be where on election day, how many people you have living where, and so on and so forth, it's a very difficult election.
Yeah, it's like throwing a child into the deep end of a swimming pool, basically.
Absolutely, yeah. And in those days, there were many different forms of identity documents used. And you had to all put them together and, allow people to vote.
Mm.
And so that's that election. Fast forward to 2024. If we repeated that kind of election today, no one would say free and fair.
No, not at all.
Absolutely. And that really tells you the story of how far we have gone. Today, people understand how important their vote is, how it translates into a seat, what it means for their representation where they live. If they live in Gauteng province, they know what it means for them in Gauteng, how it relates to a seat that would represent them in parliament and so on and so forth. And that really is what we are dealing with. We are dealing with people who now know, not just to make a cross, but who know what that cross effectively means and how you get to it, and what you require to get to it, what their rights are, in respect of that cross and so on and so forth. And so it's not surprising that, so close to an election, you have so many court cases. We are taken to court regularly. We have to, defend how we do certain things, or, justify why we do certain things in the manner that we do, how they relate to the Constitution and the law, and so on and so forth. These are the kind of things we did not do in 1994. In other words, we now know more about electoral democracy than we did. And we expect of the institutions like the Electoral Commission to deliver on the expectations that we have. And some of the expectations we have are very lofty and difficult. Others are just, what it should be. These are demands that we should fulfill, and we've got to stand up and fulfill them. That's what makes this job very interesting, but yet demanding.
So talking about demanding and interesting as well, for the ordinary South African, what does the Electoral Commission actually do?
The Constitution requires of us to do three things. It says we must conduct all elections of legislative bodies, and we have three legislative bodies in this country. We have Parliament, we have provincial legislatures, and we have local government legislative bodies. And all of those elections in those three spheres of government, we are required to conduct them.
Okay.
That's number one. The second thing is that once we do that, we must, or in the process of us doing it, we must ensure that those elections are indeed free and fair. It's no point just organizing an election and ticking a box. You must ensure that people are educated about those elections, that people have a fair chance of contesting those elections, those who qualify to contest, and that those who don't qualify to contest do not contest those elections, because it's a very key part of the freeness and fairness of an election. And thirdly, the law requires of us to have the elections of those elections declared within 7 days. Now, you may say, why is that so? There are many countries, I guess, that the legislatures, those that wrote the law realized can happen. There are countries that have an election and the election result takes forever to come out. Certainty is required in terms of our Constitution, and 7 days is what we have in law to deliver the election results in our country.
So once results have been delivered, what happens to the IEC? Like, what happens when you're not preparing or busy with an election?
Every 2.5 years or so, we have an election that takes place, a general election that takes place. In 2026, we will have elections general elections of local government. We just had them in 2021. Now, in all of this, there are arrangements that you need to make and preparations that you need to make, and very different from the one election to the other. We have two electoral acts in the country. One is the Electoral Act that deals with national and provincial elections. We also have an Electoral Act that deals with local government elections. So we need to deal with those and prepare for those. Very different elections, very different kinds of elections, and their complexity is not the same. But we also have by-elections that happen very regularly. When we conduct elections of the National Assembly and the provincial legislatures, we do not stop. The law does not provide for us to stop conducting elections. This is different when we deal with elections of local government, in that about 6 months or thereabouts before an election is held for local government, the law provides that we can stop conducting elections unless it's absolutely necessary. Mm-hmm. And so on this occasion, just less than 10 days ago, we conducted local government elections, 11 places in the country, 11 wards. And they're just as competitive as the elections you will do on a wide scale. And so they do require attention. But we also have to establish infrastructure, follow settlement patterns in the country. People move in this country. Urbanization is an issue. People move to find opportunities where they exist and establish new settlements there. We are constantly following the settlement patterns of people. We look at whether the representation of people accords with the law consistently. We look at, before every election is conducted of the National Assembly, of Parliament and provincial legislatures, we've got to ensure that the representation of people in a province accords with the amount of seats that would be available and determine them. These are the kind of things that we do on an ongoing basis.
So in terms of our elections, could you say that you sometimes do a dry run of an election before the actual election?
Yes, and I don't know many countries around the world that do these things, but an election is not something you have an opportunity to practice every day. Vote. Yeah. If you said to voters, let's practice an election, I wonder if they'll come to the station to practice with you.
Paid.
Yeah, it's possible. But we do not take it for granted that is the case. So what we would do is we would generate data, similar to an election or taken from a previous election, and we would test our own system. In other words, the capacity of our system to handle that, the capacity of our staff to deal with it. And because we know, the nature of the data that we have given, it helps us to measure the accuracy of our staff in an election, how our systems are performing in relation to that. In other words, accuracy levels, whether the systems do what they're meant to do. And we never go into an election without doing that kind of work. And finally, we do it with political parties present, witnessing what we see, so that they don't come on election day and say, this is not the kind of thing that we have seen, or you have not done this, that, and the other. They know what we have done. But also, we have kept the electoral process very transparent. Our results management processes, we give political parties, observers, the media, everyone that cares to follow an election, even you as a private citizen, you will have an app available that you can put on your cell phone, on your iPad, whatever gadget you carry, where you can follow elections at every voting station, or a voting station of your choice, or province of your choice, or municipality of your choice, or nationally. And you will have the opportunity to really, like parties do, they see a copy of a result slip that was signed by their party agents at voting station. We scan that result slip into the system, and political parties can call upon it and say, yeah, this is the signature of Gia, our party agent at that station. Gia witnessed that these are the election results as she saw them at the station, and let's check if the IEC has captured the results correctly. So I'll take that copy on the one hand, which is on the system, scanned, and they'll look at the actual results that we have captured. And anyone that finds that there is a discrepancy between this copy and that copy can send in what we call an objection. And we will not ask questions. We will go look at this. If there's been an error, we will fix it. But these are things that no longer happen, because in the process, we have put in auditors, we have designed systems that check these discrepancies and so on and so forth. And things like that will happen as an exception rather than a rule. And when you hear people talk about the integrity of an election in our country, I don't understand what they're talking about. because there is so much we have put into our elections, checks and balances, to ensure that that which happens at the voting station finds expression out in the public. I'm going to say something that I don't know many South Africans know happens. In the manner that we have built our systems, not the chairperson of the Electoral Commission, not the members of the Commission of the Electoral Commission, not the Chief Electoral Officer or any one of his staff members sees the result before you or anybody else sees it. That's the confidence we have in the process. We don't want to create a perception that there's something we do before we issue a result. It is processed in the system. Parties follow that, and they see the result at the same time that I see them. So when the result comes on there, I didn't know about it 2 seconds before.
It's a live feed.
It's a live feed.
Yeah.
It's a live feed. And if, touch wood, if there's a little error there, it's an error that everybody's going to see. And so we have built the systems to actually work very independent of human intervention. For us, the objective is very clear. We've got to translate the voters' will into that mark and represent them and their party in the results. And once that is done, we've got to then allocate the seats in terms of that will. We add no one bit this way or one bit that way. It is what it is.
So 30 years of democracy in South Africa, what does that mean for us actually?
It really means a lot. It gives us an opportunity to look back at some of the things we could do better. If you look at where we are now, 30 years, and compare us to a democracy that is 250 years old, you can really compare apples with apples in a way. You can say, South Africa, with your 30 years of electoral democracy, how are others doing? And I can tell you without any hesitation that we are punching above our weight. We are doing well. The world looks at this, the work that we do, and there are objective measures that have been put into place to look at regions of the world, Africa, the Americas, Europe, Asia, and so on and so forth. And they look at how we are doing. And I can tell you without fear that South Africa always comes somewhere in the top of the leagues. We have to continue to do that. We have to continue to do well, not only by local standards, but by world standards. And a major thing is that we continue to look at best practices and best avenues to do work. In 2021, because of the COVID pandemic, South Africans got to register online for the first time. And these are the things we learn because of the real difficulties we face and how we could meet the needs of South Africans. That process has helped us to increase the enrollment on the voters' roll of many young voters and voters abroad. They have used that online platform and used it to their great advantage.
What I appreciate that she's saying right now is that you forever reviewing yourself as the IEC, which is very important. And I appreciate that a lot, because you could sit back and be like, well, that one was successful.
Yeah.
It's fine. We'll just do what we did in the last 5 years with this one. So I highly appreciate that one. And from me as a South African, thank you so much for that.
You're most welcome. We don't hear that often. But let me tell you, in our institution, you're only as good as your next election.
That's very true.
And that's really how we work. To avoid complacency, we don't say we have done 6, we've aced them. They've not been problematic. We actually look at this one as though, you know what, this is very different from the rest. So the rest don't count. This really is the one that counts the most. And that's how we approach the work that we do.
So I know a number of South Africans try to look at our country as the glass half empty at times. However, I see it as a glass half full. And talking about half full, I want to know as to the challenges that you have faced as the Electoral Commission staging our various elections. What are some of those challenges that you faced, and how have you been able to overcome them?
The first one, as I think of it, came way back in 1999, when resourcing the commission, in other words, providing resources for the commission to undertake the work they need to do, was clarified. There is a very, very instructive court case in the Constitutional Court of the New National Party versus the President of South Africa and others. And I recommend that anyone that really wants to know what an independence means for an electoral management body, that case deals with it. In those days, very understandably, the government indicated to the commission that if you need staff, we'll provide you with civil servants who will then do what you need to do with your electoral staff. Because we don't have money, or we have many competing needs, this is money that we can afford to give you to do that work, and this is staff we can afford to do to give you that. And the court heard why that would be problematic. That people often say in proverbial terms, he who pays the piper, calls the tunes, whatever it is. It was that kind of thing that says the issue of independence of a commission means that it is resourced properly because it knows what it needs and it can justify what it needs, both in terms of human resources, planning for the challenges it faces, and financially, and when those finances come. It's a whole range of things that the court helped us to do. So from that point of view, today we don't depend on civil servants to do this. We recruit staff, we train staff that we believe would be suitable to conduct an election.
What will make these elections different from the last elections that we had in 2019?
In 2019, two things that we are doing in these elections that are different is the first one, and very importantly, it's in 2019, you will recall that you could vote anywhere. Although you're registered in this station, you could then go vote as long as you were in Gauteng or in your province, whether you're Eastern Cape, Limpopo, or Northwest, Mpumalanga, it didn't matter. If you are in that province, you would still get 2 ballots.
Okay.
Because you're registered in that province, but you could vote at another voting station. That process is now limited in that you have to notify the Chief Electoral Officer by a date. On this occasion, that date is this Friday.
Okay.
That you will not be in your voting station where you ordinarily reside. You are going to be elsewhere, and you will want to vote there. And what the Chief Electoral Officer will cause to happen is to get his staff to provide for you there and not here. And that's one major change in this election that we did not have in 2019. The second one is that you will need to vote on 3 ballots if you're in your station. But if you are not in your station and you're out of your province, you will only vote on the national to national ballot. You will not be able to vote on the regional to national. You will not be able to vote on the provincial ballot because you're outside of your province or region, so to speak.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
It makes a lot of sense. Okay, let's talk about our exercise, our right to vote as a citizen who's 18 years old. Why is it important that we go to the voting stations and cast our vote?
Democracy as a concept is good, but it requires participation. It is something every one of us have to do. Without that participation, we wouldn't have that democracy. And so it's absolutely important.
Can we talk a little bit about the role of the IEC that is playing in the continent, number one, and of course across the world as well? But also, you recently launched social media guidelines to assist the electoral management bodies in Africa. Can you tell us a little bit about those as well?
In Africa, I think we're one of the youngest democracies.
Yeah.
But we've also not shied away to give, the best we can to democracies around the world and in Africa. Because of the manner in which we have professionalized election management in a short space of time in our country, there are many electoral management bodies like us who say, my goodness, how did you come to this? How did you get to that? And so on and so forth. And so we share with them willingly. The example you spoke about on social media was an initiative we were requested to discharge by the Association of African Electoral Management Bodies, who said, South Africa, this is what you do. If we were to work together as a continent, what would what are the kind of things that we would be doing? And, less than 2 years after that, we now have guidelines that have been adopted by the continent. And we have worked with the African Union, with the United Nations Development Program, and with the electoral management bodies across the continent. This is a step that would strengthen election management practices on our continent. We also do have a lot of memoranda of understanding with electoral management bodies that say, I'd like to do this with you in exchange for this. In other words, we want to benchmark, and in exchange, we want to share with you what we do, and so on and so forth. And we have many of those kind of working relationships across the world. The last thing we do is that South Africa is the current chair of the AWEB. This is an association of world election bodies that have come together and share best practices in election management. South Africa is really humbled to have been requested to chair this body for 2 years. Our term ends in October 2024. These are the contributions we are making as a small election management body from a very small nation on the southernmost part of Africa.
That's amazing. And one thing I do appreciate about South Africa is that we're very forthcoming with the information that we have, that we've done, all of the data that we've done for ourselves. And as you say, sharing it with other African countries and of course across the world as well. Ndadima, this has been a great conversation. If it were up to me, we'd be talking and talking, but we can't. So I want to know, are there any important notices that you want South Africans to be aware of right now?
In relation to the 2024 elections, anyone who needs to notify the Chief Electoral Officer that they will not be at their base voting station, in other words, their ordinary voting station, where their name appears on the voters' roll, needs to notify the Chief Electoral Officer on or before the 3rd of May, which is this coming week, Friday. Persons that would want to apply for a special vote have until the 17th of May to apply for a special vote. And their special vote will then be provided on the 27th or the 28th of May, those 2 days.
Okay.
They will. South Africans who are traveling abroad for temporarily, in other words, you're registered here, but on election date, you won't be here, you'll be abroad. You're going to be there on the 17th or the 18th. You can notify the Chief Electoral Officer, and you will be able to vote at our mission abroad. And vice versa, if you are in a mission abroad, but on that day, you'll not be at the mission, you'll be elsewhere, where we have either back in the country or at a mission in another country. Also notify the Chief Electoral Officer, and you should be able to get your vote waiting for you there, your ballot waiting for you there where you are.
Okay. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak to us today. I'm wishing you and everyone at the IEC nothing but the best of luck on the 29th of May, even though you don't nearly need it.
We need it. We need it.
We need it.
Yeah.
But you've done 6 great general elections thus far. And may the 7th one be even better, only leading to better elections come the next elections.
Thank you very much.
To you, my fellow South African, thank you so much for tuning in. We'll be back again and we'll be talking all things integrity of elections. Garnered is the name. Please do keep yourself and others safe, whatever that means to you. But do make sure that you cast your vote on the 29th of May, 2024.